was now early 1997, and since 93 I'd been volunteering as a special friend at Hollygrove, the children's home in Hollywood. I'd initially been matched with 6-year-old Jay Don, who had ADHD and was a challenging but very interesting little boy who particularly enjoyed doing chores in my apartment. I believe this gave him a feeling of a real home environment and perhaps a sense of security. Of course, we did a lot of fun kid stuff too. It wasn't all work. When he was 8 years old, he went to live with his grandmother in Nashville. But I stayed in touch and actually spent a couple of days with him while visiting a good friend who also happened to live in Nashville. Jadon seemed to be thriving and obviously was much happier being with his family. The social worker at Hollygrove contacted me a few weeks after Jadon had moved and told me that she had another little boy who she thought would be a good match for me. I'd requested boys rather than girls, perhaps because I was more used to boys. I'd been a teenager when my 2 brothers were born, and I just felt more comfortable with boys rather than girls. This boy was 9 years old, and for privacy purposes I'll call him Nathan. He was a happy, handsome little guy whose mother was from Mexico and his father from El Salvador. He'd ended up in Hollygrove because he was being neglected by his drug-addict father, who he'd lived with since his mother left when Nathan was 5 years old. After Nathan was removed from his home, his father spent time in prison and was subsequently deported to El Salvador. There was a grandmother living in LA, and I later heard that she was the one who'd contacted Hollygrove about Nathan, but for some reason she wasn't able to take care of him. I never got the full story. The social workers at Hollygrove were always reluctant to give too much information to the special friends about these abused and abandoned children, which frankly I thought was a mistake. But I suppose I understood that perhaps they were afraid their volunteers might say something inappropriate to the kids that could possibly be a trigger. However, since we were spending, at least in my case, sometimes up to 10 hours a day every week of quality one-on-one time with the children, it seemed to me that any of us special friends could just as easily say or do something very innocently that might have a negative effect on a child. It was definitely an extremely thin line that no one wanted to cross. Fortunately, Nathan's social worker was a little more forthcoming with this little boy's background, and it was enough for me to know how damaged he must have been. But he never showed any signs of neglect or abuse, except later mentioning a couple of incidents when his dad saved him. I'm saying the word saved here with quotes around it to emphasize the irony of what that meant. Those stories to come later. From the moment we met, Nathan and I clicked. It was almost love at first sight. He was very smart, personable, affectionate, loved to give and receive hugs, and introduced me to butterfly kisses by fluttering his long, beautiful eyelashes against my cheek. Several months into our friendship, we were sitting across from one another in Nathan's favorite restaurant. You guessed it, McDonald's, while he tucked into a happy meal of French fries and chicken nuggets. Suddenly, he stopped eating and in a frantic voice said, "Marie, Marie, Marie!" I was concerned. What was wrong? "What is it?" I asked just as frantically. "What's wrong, Nathan?" Then he said words that caused me to shed a tear. "I love you, Marie." So this was the dear little boy that brought such joy into my life. We really enjoyed one another's company and had a lot of fun together. And all my friends loved Nathan. He was very popular. He was so open and outgoing. He just got along with everyone. I enrolled him into karate classes in Santa Monica, where he met Milos, who was from Bosnia. They were both the same age and yet looked so physically different. Whereas Nathan was dark-skinned and quite small for his age, Miloš was a blonde giant. But they were the best of pals, and Miloš often came out with us on day trips, movies, and so forth. I didn't know the whole story of his parents' flight from their home country a few years previously, but I can only imagine how heartbreaking it must have been for them being forced to leave everything and everyone they knew and loved in order to survive. Unfortunately, this is a scenario that is sadly too familiar today, as Ukrainians are not only forced to leave their beautiful country, but are subjected to indescribable violations of body, mind, and spirit. One wonders how anyone can ever endure such horrors of war-torn countries, but the human spirit is so much stronger and courageous than we could ever imagine. And in times of adversity and evil, goodness emerges. Helping hands are outstretched in loving and practical gestures. Kindness soothes injured souls. I don't know what help Miloš's parents got when they arrived in America, but they went on to own a small restaurant in a lovely little courtyard on fashionable Montana Avenue in Santa Monica. They served traditional Balkan cuisine, which in itself was a risky proposition in the land of salads and sushi. After spending practically every weekend together for close to 2 years, I decided I'd take the leap and formally foster Nathan. I embarked on the necessary 6-month training course, which was pretty intense, naturally. And since I only lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, started looking for a 2-bedroom. In the meantime, in my work as an abridger and producer of books on tape at Dove Audio, I was assigned a non-fiction book on how to talk to children about money, among other things. I can't remember the title, I'm sorry to say. It was really good, though. The female author was going to read the book, and because she was quoting children of 10 to 12 years old, asking their parents for video games, high-end sports gear, and so forth, I thought it was necessary to bring a couple of kids into the studio to participate in the book. I immediately thought of Nathan, who was thrilled at the thought of being in a recording studio, even if it wasn't as a rapper. I had to clear it with Hollygraph, of course, and make sure he wasn't taken out of school to work. He was also going to be paid, and I needed to confirm that any money Nathan received in the form of a check would go into his own personal bank account. One of the questions from the book that Nathan had to ask was, "Mom, can I have a pair of Air Jordans?" When the parent responds with something like, "Money doesn't grow on trees, you know," or "Do you think I'm made of money?" The author explains that it means nothing to a 10-year-old. She details in her book the real-life language to use so that children understand how money in a family works, practical and necessary uses for it, and sometimes money left over for small luxuries, but not Air Jordans. If the child wants them badly enough or any other item, then he or she needs to earn pocket money doing chores and saving for what they want, which will give the item more value. I'd asked the Dove Audio receptionist Margaret if her 2 sons with Jermaine Jackson would like to come in and be part of the book, but apparently they were out of the country with their dad. I'm sure they didn't have to do chores to buy whatever they fancied, at least not when they were with their father. I'd already told Nathan that Margaret was almost related to Michael Jackson, so we didn't waste any time asking her if she could get him a signed photo of Michael. I know she got this a lot, but she liked Nathan and said she'd see what she could do. I think that was the biggest highlight of the recording session for him. He never stopped asking me if the photo had arrived yet, but I didn't want to pester Margaret about it. I trusted that she would indeed do the best she could, and, true to her word, a month or so later, she handed me a signed photo of Michael Jackson for Nathan. I had it framed and gave it to him the next day. The look of delight on his handsome little face was a sight to behold. He was a star himself, and his popularity soared as he showed off this wonderful prize to the other young residents of Hollygrove. He treasured that photo for a few more years, until it was ruthlessly taken away from him. Next time, back with Barry and Wag the dog. Thanks for listening.